This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person or one bad decision or one night that went wrong. This is about a system that kept working even after it stopped protecting the people it was built for. Nothing here collapsed. Nothing here snapped. Paperwork was filed, doors opened, processes moved forward. And while all of that looked normal, something else was being quietly absorbed into the structure. Violence didn't force its way in. It was accommodated. That's the danger. Not chaos, not failure, but continuity. If this feels distant, if it feels like someone else's problem, that's part of how this works. Systems like this don't announce themselves. They blend in. They feel boring, administrative, safe. Stay with me. Don't look away yet. Because the most important part of this story isn't what happened. It's how long it was allowed to keep happening. And once you see that mechanism, you can't unsee it. What actually controls a system like this is not ideology, not politics, not even force. It's permission. Permission embedded in routine, in delays, in exceptions that stop feeling exceptional. When enforcement becomes negotiable, when oversight becomes flexible, power stops flowing downward. It starts circulating inward. Quietly, efficiently, legally. That's how systems change without reform. They don't break, they recalibrate. What looks like neutrality becomes insulation. What looks like professionalism becomes cover. And what looks like stability becomes storage, a place where risk, violence, and damage can be parked without triggering alarms. No single actor needs to understand the whole picture. They only need to understand their part. Sign here, file that later, ignore this today. The system rewards that behavior. It smooths friction, it buys time, and over time, that permission compounds. It starts deciding who gets noticed and who doesn't. That's where this stops being abstract. Because once permission replaces accountability, the damage doesn't arrive loudly. It accumulates. There was a moment when this system still behaved differently. Not perfectly, but visibly. Before, breakdowns caused friction. They triggered reviews. They forced questions. Now, the shift is almost invisible. What used to be an exception becomes a workaround. What used to raise alarms becomes background noise. The timeline stretches. Weeks become months. Months become years. Nothing dramatic changes on any single day. That's the point. Slow change doesn't feel dangerous. It feels reasonable. It feels mature. The system learns to absorb stress instead of resolving it. Complaints are rerouted, cases are delayed, responsibility diffuses. And because the harm unfolds gradually, it never arrives as an emergency. It arrives as data, as trends, as numbers that can always be explained later. By the time anyone looks back, the before feels distant, almost naive. This is how normalization works, not through force, through patience. And once a system adapts this way, it doesn't need to be attacked from the outside. It starts doing the damage itself. That's when the first visible shock appears, not as a warning, but as a symptom. The shock didn't announce itself as systemic. It never does. It arrived as a single moment that was supposed to be contained, a confrontation, a weapon drawn, one decision measured in seconds. Immediately, the debate narrowed. Intent, justification, procedure. All the familiar arguments rushed in to seal the frame. Was it lawful? Was it justified? Was it tragic, but necessary? But while attention fixed on that instant, something else was already moving. Because that moment did not end anything. It opened something. Quietly, methodically, the system did what it always does when pressure spikes. It expanded its scope. It followed paperwork. It unlocked doors that had been closed not by force, but by habit. And behind those doors wasn't disorder. It was infrastructure. Rooms connected to rooms, names connected to names, delays connected to protections. If you're watching this and thinking this still sounds like an isolated incident, stay with me. Tap like if you think moments like this rarely stand alone, because the real story didn't unfold in public. It unfolded while most people were asleep. And by the time the scale became visible, the system was already in motion. Here is the mechanism most people never see. Large systems don't protect wrongdoing by blocking enforcement. They protect it by absorbing it. Risk is distributed. Responsibility is fragmented. No single action looks decisive enough to challenge. Paper replaces judgment. Process replaces urgency. Information moves vertically just slowly enough to lose its edge, horizontally just narrowly enough to avoid pattern recognition. What benefits from this is not chaos, it's coordination. When legality becomes a shield instead of a boundary, harm gains something priceless: time. Time to organize, time to scale, time to embed. Those who benefit are rarely visible. They don't need to threaten the system. They let the system work for them. Those who absorb the damage are easier to identify. Communities, institutions that still believe the rules matter. People who assume someone else is watching. This is how violence becomes sustainable, not explosive, predictable. And once that balance settles, it doesn't need constant protection. It only needs silence to continue. But silence is fragile. All it takes is one rupture in the flow. And when that happens, the system reacts faster than anyone expects. Then the pace changes. No speeches, no press conferences, just movement. What had been dormant activates all at once. Files open, warrants stack, coordination tightens. The system that once slowed everything down now moves with precision. Doors that were never meant to be open together open together. Locations light up simultaneously. Connections surface faster than they can be explained away. This is what escalation looks like when delay is no longer useful. There's no single explosion. There's a sequence. Resistance appears, then disappears. Assets freeze, routes collapse. What's striking is not the violence. It's how prepared the system is for it, as if it always knew this moment would come, as if everything before was rehearsal. And in that acceleration, something becomes clear. This was never fragile. It was engineered to withstand pressure, until it wasn't. Because when systems like this are finally stressed, they don't fail gracefully. They expose everything at once. And what comes next isn't resolution, it's exposure. Here's where this stops being abstract, because the system doesn't absorb damage evenly. It never does. It redirects it, downward, outward. You feel it in the background of your life, in places you stop going, in sirens you stop reacting to, in numbers that rise until they're no longer surprising. You're told these are separate problems, unrelated failures, bad luck. But what you're living with is the residue of permission, of delays that favored stability over safety, of silence that looked like professionalism. When harm is distributed this way, no one knocks on your door to explain it. It shows up indirectly, in overwhelmed hospitals, in schools adapting to trauma instead of preventing it, in neighborhoods that learn to lower expectations. If this feels familiar, that's not coincidence. Systems like this don't just fail the people at the margins. They train everyone else to live with less. If you're still watching, stay. Share this if you think these consequences don't get traced back far enough. Because what happens next doesn't stay contained. It never does. Once a system adapts this way, the effects don't respect borders. Not city limits, not jurisdictions, not institutions. What moved quietly in one place begins to echo elsewhere. Patterns repeat, routes adjust, methods travel. This is how local tolerance becomes systemic risk. Other systems watch and learn, not formally, instinctively. They notice what triggers scrutiny and what doesn't. What slows enforcement and what accelerates it. What can be normalized. And the absence of immediate collapse becomes proof of resilience, which is dangerous. Because stability, in this form, is contagious. It tells other institutions that absorption works. That delay is survivable. That silence is safe. At this point, nothing needs to be coordinated centrally. The logic has already spread. That's when the problem stops being about one network, or one city, or one failure. It becomes structural. And once that happens, intervention gets harder. Not because of resistance, but because no one can agree where the edges are anymore. What comes next depends on which pressure arrives first, and whether the system bends or fractures. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. None of them are guaranteed. The first is adjustment. Oversight tightens. Permissions retract. Processes are rewritten just enough to restore friction. The system absorbs the lesson without admitting how close it came to collapse. This path looks calm. It feels responsible. It also leaves most of the structure intact. The second is erosion. Attention fades. Urgency dissipates. Safeguards exist on paper but weaken in practice. New workarounds appear, different names, same logic. The system doesn't fail. It thins, quietly. And then there's rupture. This happens when accumulated damage finally outruns absorption, when exposure arrives faster than legitimacy can keep up, when trust drops below a recoverable threshold. Rupture doesn't announce itself as reform. It arrives as disbelief, as refusal, as people deciding the system no longer deserves patience. Which path unfolds isn't decided by intention. It's decided by timing, by pressure, by whether accountability stays continuous or becomes episodic again. And that question is still open. This is where most stories try to comfort you. This one won't, because nothing here guarantees the danger is gone. Exposure is not immunity. Intervention is not cure. What was revealed wasn't a flaw that slipped through the system. It was a feature that developed quietly while everyone was watching the wrong indicators. The most unsettling part isn't how much damage occurred. It's how ordinary the conditions were that allowed it. Routine, professionalism, trust without verification. Those conditions still exist. They exist wherever silence is rewarded, where delay feels safer than confrontation, where authority is assumed to be self-correcting. If you're looking for a clean ending, there isn't one. There's only an unresolved warning. Systems don't protect themselves automatically. They protect what they are told to protect. And when attention moves on, so does accountability. If you want to understand what happens next, don't stop here. This story doesn't end with what was exposed. It continues with what we decide to keep watching. Subscribe, stay alert. Because the next failure won't look exactly like this one. And that's the point.